Hey, Mike. I hope you don't mind. I'm sorry, but we are already live, so you're jumping right into
Okay, let's go. Let's
the
do it. No time to
magic
waste.
the magic of Twitch.tv, which
All right.
I don't know if you've ever been on Twitch before.
I have not. This is my first Twitch as an active participant. I've watched a bunch of them, but I've never actually been on one. So I feel like I'm breaking new old ground here.
Well, this is one of the larger political streams on the platform, so we have a couple thousand people watching us
All
live
right.
right now.
Hey,
Uh,
people.
and I have to say that we've caught some of your interviews before, Mike, on the various
Mhm.
network news
Yes.
outlets. So why don't I just quickly introduce you to the stream, and then if I forget anything, feel free to jump in. So, chat, this is Mike Rothschild. He's a contributing writer for the news and technology site The Daily Dot. And you've been talking about the intersections of internet culture and politics through the lens of conspiracy theories. And you've been specialized in QAnon since 2018. And you have recently published a book called, let me see if I want to make sure I get it. The Storm is Upon Us: How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult, and Conspiracy Theory of Everything. Now, one thing that everybody probably brings up to you constantly, and I know you've mentioned it before, but not being a member of the famous Rothschild banking family.
No.
I I go on, Mike.
So no, I'm not a member of the Rothschild family. I drive a 2004 Toyota Corolla. So unless my trillions are extremely well hidden, I am just a person who happens to share the same last name and write about some of the conspiracy theories and hoaxes that they are a part of. And of course, I am then pulled into those conspiracy theories and hoaxes, with people just assuming that as a trillionaire, I have a lot of time to sit around and debate people on Twitter, which trillionaires don't actually do. I mean, I guess some do, but families that have sort of had their money for a long time, that kind of old money, they don't really engage with the hoaxes and the conspiracy theories about them.
Mm-hmm.
So you will never find actual Rothschilds talking about the conspiracy theories about them.
Right.
Just people who apparently share their name.
Well, it's fun because I assume this is a constant source of irritation and menace for you, talking about QAnon and having that name. It's probably a rough experience. Is that true, or am I off base with
It's
that?
it's a little bit of a pain. The funny thing is, people were like, "Well, why didn't you take a fake name?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, I didn't really think about it. Like, I didn't think that this was gonna really go a lot of places that would, put me in contact with trolls. But at the same time, people are gonna figure it out anyway because it's the internet. So
Exactly. That
if
would make it even
if
worse.
yeah, it would make it worse. Like if I was like, "Hi, I'm Mike Johnson," people are going to figure out that I'm actually Mike Rothschild. They're going like, "Oh, he's been hiding it the whole time." Like, just out with it.
hmm hmm Yeah. Well, that's. I figured we should just get that question out of the
Sure,
way first
sure.
because I'm sure whenever you talk about the internet, and you mention QAnon, if somebody's named the Rothschild, then
Yeah,
that's gonna immediately be the first reaction.
yeah.
Uh, um, so what got you involved and interested in the QAnon movement and its intersection with politics in general?
Sure. So I've been writing about conspiracy theories for a long time, and I've been interested in conspiracy theories as storytelling even longer than that. I used to listen to the Art Bell radio show, Coast to Coast AM, which would have all kinds of conspiracy theories and like crop circles and UFOs and angels and time travel. And then he'd have his open line shows where people would just call in unscreened and just sort of talk about whatever. I was always really fascinated with his approach to this kind of material. Like, he believed some of it, but he didn't believe all of it, and he was really skeptical about certain things. And he was also very humane to the people who called in and were clearly maybe not doing that well. He,
Yeah.
he always sort of talked to them as people rather than just getting the easy dunks on them, which I
hmm
think is much too easy on social media. So I've been interested in conspiracies as storytelling for a long, long time. And then in beginning of 2018, in my sort of research and writing and stuff, I started to see tweets about John McCain and Hillary Clinton wearing orthopedic walking boots, not because they had, sprained their ankle like the rest of us mere mortals, but because they had been arrested in a secret purge of the deep state called the Storm. Now, never mind that an ankle bracelet is actually fairly bulky and you can't just like hide it in an orthopedic shoe. I loved the idea that there was this secret or mass arrest that happened, but like random people on Twitter knew about it. So I started to really dig into this. And for the first month or two, I just thought it was a joke. And I thought it was just a bunch of people who were sort of collectively losing their minds. But I started to realize that it was very similar to these long-running scams that I'd already written about, these things I talk about in the book, things like Nasara and the Iraqi dinar scam.
The dinar.
The dinar, yeah. The worthless currency of Iraq that will be revalued to make its holders millionaires at some point. They're a very similar setup where you have a guru at the center of it who has all of the secret knowledge and all of the intel, and they're doling it out to the lucky few who have figured out what's going on here. And at some point, the great change event is going to come and transform everything and make everything perfect. And in the case of QAnon, it wasn't a financial windfall. It was the streets running red with the blood of the deep state. And I realized that you can only promise that for so long before somebody decides that they're going to make it happen themselves.
Right.
And that's when I started to get really freaked out about QAnon. And of course, then it took like months longer for anybody to really pay attention to it and really take it seriously.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Iraqi dinar, because that was one of like the early Facebook scams, it feels like, where it really proliferated, and it got a lot of the same people. Maybe, do you think it was this kind of like quintessential Trump supporter that's vulnerable to this? So like maybe, a non-college educated, but nonetheless well-to-do white middle class, ex-urbanite, or is it just something that is kind of transcending all racial and ethnic groups and socioeconomic backgrounds? Is like the QAnon phenomenon similar to that, of just like being a lot more diverse than, we might first expect? Or is it really a phenomenon of like white people?
It's sort of like it's everything, which is not the most satisfying answer. But the things like the dinar and then QAnon catch on with people who are already prone to believing things like it. So the demographics for QAnon are mostly white, like mostly middle class, upper middle class. Geographically, they're all over the place. But the most common denominator is an extant belief in conspiracy theories. If you already believe that 9/11 was an inside job, Barack Obama was born in Kenya, the dinar is going to get revalued and make you rich, you're probably also going to believe QAnon. Right. And that's why it wasn't organized that way. It wasn't like the people who were behind the dinar scam were like, and now for our next hit. It just, these things play on the same emotions in the same people. And those are very human emotions. The need for secret knowledge, the need for understanding, the need to feel like you're a part of something bigger and forbidden that's going to make everything better. That's very human. And everybody has that to some extent. Right. And things like Q just exploit it ruthlessly.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you say this, because one of my previous professions was working in securities arbitration. And that has to do with, suing brokers or financial advisors who, put their clients in unsuitable investments or scams or whatever. And one of the things that you learn is the idea of like a sucker list, which is basically something that scam artists or, identity criminals or con men pass around, which is marks, people that have fallen for scams in the past. Yeah. And they actively pursue those people. And so it makes perfect sense to me that the type of person that would believe that we didn't land on the moon would also believe that Trump is going to purge the evil pedophile deep state, because, those are kind of related ideas. The idea that there is a secret cabal behind the scenes orchestrating things that are not true and hiding the truth from most people makes, logical sense that you could connect the two. One of my chatters wanted to get your thoughts on like the history of conservative conspiracy in this country. And like, for example, the Ku Klux Klan and, in the 20s becoming the John Birch Society, and this kind of this like undercurrent in America of this like conservative, often evangelical white American who passes these ideas around and how they have morphed over the years. Do you see a through line there? Do you see a relation to anti-Semitism and some of the past conspiracy movements in this country?
Oh, sure. The through line is to me at least is very apparent between QAnon and the sort of the conspiratorial mindset that it really has taken over the Republican Party. Going to the New World Order conspiracies of the '90s, the Satanic Panic stuff. I mean, that's not so political, but it's a lot of the same. A lot of the same emotional stuff is there. Going to the John Birch Society, going to the Klan, going to the anti-Masonic parties, the Know Nothing Party. I mean, there's always been a shadowy string pulling cabal at the heart of what a lot of people think actually runs American politics. You can call it the Freemasons, the Catholics, the Jews, the deep state, the Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, Skull and Bones. There's a million different names for it. They intersect with each other. At the heart, it is the desire that someone is in control and someone is dictating what is going on. This is not just random chance. We're not just victims of our own circumstance. Somebody is out to get me and keep me down. And Q is different in a lot of those other things in that Q gives you the way to fight back. It gives you the ability to decode the drops, to make the memes, to go to the conferences, to march on the Capitol, make videos, share stuff with your friends. In that sense, it maybe is a little bit more like the Klan, where it is very active and you do things together as
a social thing as well.
It's a social thing. It's a community thing, rather than you're just reading the pamphlet or you're watching the video about all the people the Clintons killed. You can't do anything about it, but you know about it. With Q, you can do something about it.
So this is interesting because this channel comes from a strongly left perspective. So we tend to look at a lot of the problems confronting American society from the point of view of wealth, the haves and the have-nots, the divide between the capital class, the capital owning class, and the workers, and how that seems like there's been an increasing in power among the wealthy. The development of things like the Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute, Chamber of Commerce, super PACs, and the way that money has become more and more involved in our politics as, organized labor and some of the more traditional organs of the regular working class have declined. Do you think that the QAnon stuff and phenomenon is linked to that? Because, I'm from Pennsylvania, and it's kind of the home of the Rust Belt. They call it the Rust Belt because it was the industrial heartland of the country, and now it's lost that. And so you have seen a transition from what was traditionally this blue collar Democratic white working class voter, and they have kind of fallen away from the Democratic Party as their economic circumstances have worsened. Do you see a linkage between those areas of the country and belief in Q, belief in the cabal as a way of diverting attention from their fact that their economic circumstances have been done for the benefit of wealthy people?
Yeah, it's nothing in Q land is ever quite so simple. I wish it were. The economic demographic of QAnon tends to be a little more well-to-do. I mean, if you look just as a very minor example at the Capitol riot, the people who were going to DC had the money to fly across country. They had the money to stay at the Trump Hotel. They had the money to buy thousands of dollars in tactical gear. This was not economic anxiety. I think what you're seeing more than economic anxiety is cultural anxiety. These are people who for a long time were the backbone of American society. They got everything that they wanted. If you were a white man in America, very, very few people said no to you. Now we're getting to a point culturally where progressivism is, as they believe, canceling their way of life. They can't tell the jokes they used to be able to tell. They can't, the sports team that they rooted for is changing their mascot. Some government think tank told them they can only eat 20 burgers a week rather than 21 burgers a week. That Dr. Seuss book that they'd never heard of yesterday is suddenly being, ripped away from their hands. And it's like these very minor things become massively important when your own grievance is the center of the universe. And of course, we had a president whose own grievances were the center of American life for 4 years. Everything that happened was powered by Donald Trump's sense of grievance and pettiness and vengeance against anybody who wronged him. And when you get into that world, you feel like Trump's problems are your problems. And suddenly everything is a big deal. Everything's being taken away from you. And things like QAnon and things like stolen election conspiracies and COVID conspiracies become your way of fighting back against the people who are taking your way of life away. So it's not so much economic. It's not so much, they're taking our jobs.
Right.
It's they're taking our places of worship. They're taking our jokes. They're taking our food, our way of life. And that becomes almost like a primordial sense of having to fight back. And it's very powerful and it's very compelling.
Yeah, I'm struck when you say that to, kind of my historical understanding of far-right movements, fascist movements. I don't want to belabor it too much, but I think you'd have to be pretty stupid to not look at, Italian fascism, German fascism, Spanish fascism, Portuguese fascism, Chilean fascism, and not see a certain level of commonality between the type of people that are supporting Trumpism and QAnon. People that supported the Nazi, National Socialist Party in Germany were not the working class. It was that more well-to-do, petite bourgeois person, and the narrative of Germanness being undermined and degraded, and the stabbed in the back myth. I mean, it's right out of, quite frankly, the Nazi playbook. I don't know what to say. And the idea, instead of it being the Jews having some sort of secret plan to destroy the Aryan race in some sort of cockamamie racial theory, which was the Nazi theory, we have this pedophile cabal. And do you think of the QAnon movement as a proto-fascist movement or a crypto-fascist movement? How concerned are you about, the Republican Party just kind of morphing slowly, but also expeditiously at the same time to a fascist party? And is that something that we should be extremely concerned about?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely concerned about it. And I think that crypto-fascism is really baked into QAnon. It's there from the very beginning. I mean, Q's first post made 4 years ago tomorrow, actually, was that Hillary Clinton was going to be arrested for what? Who knows? And that the Marines and National Guard would be called up to crush the riots that would take place after Hillary Clinton's arrest. You immediately have a kind of a military takeover of the country in the service of a sort of extrajudicial, illegal military tribunals against private citizens. I mean, this is like the worst nightmares of the Alex Jones, conspiracy movement, who thought that the federal jackboots were going to kick down your door and take away your guns. Except this time you're cheering for the federal jackboots because they're kicking down the doors of the people you don't like. It is like a complete inversion of the fears that powered conspiracy theories in the 90s. It's like, we're flying the black helicopters now.
Right.
And we're in charge and we're going to get rid of these people and it's going to be awesome. And that's really what powered Q for really its entire time, was this bloodlust of our enemies are going to be brutally purged and it's going to be in the name of freedom. And that's terrifying in a lot of ways.
It's funny you mention that, because a lot of the people who cried about the black helicopters or Waco or Ruby Ridge or any of these other 90s conspiracy, the UN Agenda 21.
FEMA camps, Agenda 21,
Those are the people that are now cheering on, if not QAnon. It's the same exact people.
Sure.
And what I find really interesting about that, and I hate to just point this out, but the New York Times published an op-ed piece by Senator Tom Cotton, where he specifically called for the 82nd Airborne to be brought in to stamp on Black Lives Matter protests over the summer of 2020.
Right.
And so for me, it seems to, I mean, from my point of view, as a leftist, and maybe I'm more on guard against this because I know that it tends to come for us first. Aren't we like most of the way there? Like, aren't we waiting for some sort of Reichstag fire event or, you know, some sort of big catastrophe or the Republicans getting back in power? Like, how close are we to a QAnon style catastrophe in this country, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that whatever happens, it's not going to look like something that's happened before. And I think, you know, there's a tendency to fight the next war the way the last war was fought, and the opponent is like fighting the war the way they're going to fight the war, and they're just rewriting the playbook. You know, I think with something like January 6th, I think that people were sort of shocked by what happened, and I wasn't surprised that these people got violent, that they marched on the Capitol. I was surprised they got in. I was surprised at how long it all took and how sort of inept that the response to it was. Now, whether that was on purpose, whether that was engineered, I don't know. You know, that's getting a little too into conspiracy theories for my taste. But I think that it really wouldn't take a lot for some Republican official to go, I'm not certifying these electoral votes. This is fraud. Whoever our guy won, and that's just the way it is. And at that point, you no longer have America. I mean, if you have a free election that a bunch of state level Republicans decided went the other way, we don't have democracy anymore. Now, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what happens after that. But that to me is the moment where it's like, okay, this country doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know who is going to be the Republican who decides I'm going to be the one who puts the nail in the coffin of America.
Yeah, you know, Mike, you know, gosh, this is becoming more conversational than an interview because I got a lot of thoughts that are that you're bringing up.
I love it.
You know, for me, I can't help but look back at 2000. You know, that was basically the first election that I was, you know, aware of and had a stake in, and it feels like it already happened. It feels like they already did, in fact, steal an election that they did not win. And it was close enough that they were able to use legal maneuvering, but that was pretty, you know, the scholars that have gone back, the consortiums that have looked at the votes and the voting systems have come out and said Al Gore won the election and there was plenty of time to count the votes. And, you know, that was basically stolen by the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party did not have an effective counter. And it resulted in George Bush being reelected, and all sorts of catastrophes have come from that, from my point of view. And, you know, Donald Trump's was basically another try. And, you know, our system itself is already creakily clattering along, but it's already losing parts, you know? And so here's a conversational part is I think of somewhere like Hungary right now, you know, with Viktor Orban. And it is not they still go through the forms of the elections and stuff, but more and more of the media is under control of him. More and more of the opposition is targeted. More and more of the cultural sphere is controlled for the service of his party. There is more and more tamping down on the rights of minority groups. And, you know, it's sort of like the frog boiling in the pot, to use an analogy that's been done to death. But do you see that, like, you know, and just to shape this into a question, you know, Tucker Carlson has recently been going over to Hungary and doing shows and saying, look how great Hungary is, and this is the way we should be doing things. Do you think of America kind of morphing into a Viktor Orban, Hungary-inspired, you know, extremely flawed democracy where the Democrats are a rump party and the Republicans pretty much control everything?
You know, it's certainly possible. You know, we take for granted that these systems work and that the people who are entrusted with upholding these systems will act in the best interest of the American people and not in their own best interests. And I think we saw with January 6th, you know, there were a lot of Republicans who said, this is not a line I'm willing to cross. Like, we're not sending dual electors. We're not throwing out the votes. I mean, I hate to give Mike Pence any credit, but he really did do the right thing after all the other options were exhausted, of saying, I'm not doing this. I'm just going to certify the votes and that's it. Like, I don't have the power to do anything else. So I think that as long as there are enough people who are not willing to be written down in the history books as the person who slammed the door shut on America, I think we will not turn into Hungary. But it's very disturbing, the ideation that a lot of conservative pundits have for these, dictatorial regimes. And, it's something that it's sort of, again, the sort of the flip side of conservatism in the 80s and 90s, where, we were the last bastion of freedom. We stand in the breach against the communists. We will never be a dictatorship. Now it's like, sure, we'll be a dictatorship as long as we're the ones running it.
Well, I mean, it's funny because, when we talk about the conservatism, this is the myth making that is concerning to me, because when we look at the 80s and the 90s conservative movement, they were very comfortable supporting extreme authoritarian regimes, right?
Sure.
Supporting the Iran-Contra scandal is famous, where, that was literally lawless. Like there was a law that says you couldn't send money to the Contras,
right,
because they were committing atrocities, and the CIA sold weapons to Iran to secretly smuggle money into, it was in support of an extreme far right group. And we have, even under Biden right now, our relationship with Saudi Arabia, it just came out. They have this thing called the Tiger Squad, which is an assassination kidnapping unit. They killed Khashoggi. Around the world, even South Korea, Taiwan was under martial law until 1987.
South Korea has a brutal authoritarian record.
Yeah. And so like we have this kind of myth making about the conservative movement that to myself, I look at the 80s at the beginning of a path that we're on, the creation of this conservative movement, this anti-democracy movement. The myth about how we're a republic, not a democracy, and how, maybe certain types of people shouldn't be able to control the nation. And so what do you think about that? Like the rise of kind of an outright anti-democratic viewpoint in the philosophy of the conservative movement. And do I have a point here? Do you think this is actually a concern that one of our parties is becoming rabidly anti-democratic?
Oh, it's a huge concern. If you look at the Republican Party, it's like this was the rule of law, personal responsibility, small government party. And now they are wanting the government to basically intervene and overturn an election because they didn't like how it turned out. I mean, this is the complete inversion of everything that these people stood for, except it's the same people. So what we're seeing is a party in the Republicans whose ideas are becoming less and less appealing to people, who haven't won the popular vote in an election. I mean, they've done it once since 2000. They're not well liked at the state level, but they're holding on to power any way they can. And what holding on to power means is fewer people get to vote. It's harder to vote. And if we don't like the way the vote turned out, we just pretend it never happened that way. And we invent our own reality where we get everything that we want the way we used to get everything we want. And that is becoming more and more the driving force of one political party. And the other political party just doesn't seem like they're getting how bad this can turn.
They don't seem to have a self-preservation drive. This is the thing that is causing me a tremendous amount of stress. Is I can understand an enemy, but I can't understand a lukewarm friend. There's some teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. that we go back to frequently on my stream, which is where he talks about the biggest enemy is the white moderate, because he kind of understands the Ku Klux Klaner or the white citizens counselor, but it's people that are of goodwill, but they're lukewarm and telling you to wait. And it's like, wait for what? There's no point where the Republicans are going to work with the Democrats to ensure a fair election. We're watching.
That's done.
Yeah. And we're watching right now gerrymandering happening, around the country, which is, an element that you neglected to mention. I mean, there's so many ways they're rigging it, but which is just the idea of, we're going to put all the Democrats into one district, and then we're going to make 7 Republican districts that are 70% Republican. And it doesn't matter if you get a gigantic groundswell of 65% of the country within that realm of the gerrymandering, they'll still lose.
Right.
And, you know, Wisconsin's a perfect example. You know, right now in 2018, Democratic candidates for state legislature got 55% of the vote and 41% of the seats.
Right.
And you know, you just can't win a game that's rigged like that.
Right. Right.
And so I feel like for me, when I look at your work, Mike, I think of the QAnon movement as kind of the popular front, the group, the popular mass of people that are the kind of the foot soldiers for this anti-democratic turn. Is that a fair assessment of what QAnon represents and why January 6th might be just the first of many such incidents?
Yeah, you know, these people really look at themselves as digital soldiers, to, you know, steal a phrase that Michael Flynn copyrighted. They are the ones in the trenches fighting the war against evil. And this is not a political question to these people. They're not people who are, you know, concerned about marginal tax rates or, you know, oil drilling policy. This is about destroying Satan and saving children. And if you have that as the flag that you're marching under, you will march anywhere and you'll never give up, because you feel like if you give up, then the evil ones, then the evil Babylonian cult that's been running the world for 6,000 years, they get their final victory, and you're the one who's going to stop them. And it's a philosophy that powers your entire life, and everything that you do is filtered through that battle between good and evil. And you see it in the social media posts of Q believers, the misery of these people, them giving up their hobbies, turning their backs on their friends and families and on the things they used to love to do, because everything is satanic, everything is evil. Every waking moment must be devoted to destroying the evil. And it turns you into in almost like a suicide bomber. You know, the parallels between QAnon and things like Al-Qaeda are fairly evident if you really start to dig into it.
Yeah, you know, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because that talks about recruitment, right? So like when you see the QAnon, when you get the full dose of QAnon as a normal uninitiated person, that would probably be like, that sounds crazy. But can you talk about like some of the movements that they've done to kind of onboard people into the you know, the Q rabbit hole? One of the things in particular I'm thinking of is quote, Save the Children rallies.
Sure.
You know, can you talk about like QAnon morphing, because there hasn't been drops in what, a year?
Right.
And what is QAnon dropping into, and movements like, you know, Save the Children?
Sure. So the idea that if you hit people with, you know, the craziest stuff first, they're going to be repelled by it. I think that there's a lot to that. I mean, I think, you know, to me, I look at the structure of something like Scientology for that, where you don't get the, you know, the bodies stacked in the volcano and the DC-10s dropping neutron bombs and Xenu. You don't get that when you sign up for your free stress test. You get like strategies for managing anxiety. The Xenu stuff comes later, once you started paying. So you get worked into it. And more than anything, the people who are getting really pulled into QAnon are the people who've already done that work with other conspiracy theories. People don't just wake up one morning after being a centrist Democrat and watching CNN and suddenly decide that Hillary Clinton runs a baby eating cabal. That's just not the way people are. You get brought into it by other conspiracy theories. Q is a ladder. You know, conspiracies are a ladder, and Q's another rung on it. And one of the things that started to happen in the summer of 2020 is the social media companies really started to figure out what was going on. Why it took so long, I think, is something we're really finding out now with a lot of these Facebook leaks. But the big social media giants finally said, hey, we got to do something about this. This is out of control. So the Q promoters realized that they were going to get banned if they kept talking about QAnon. So they started talking about something like Save the Children, which is a very, you know, anodyne feeling. I mean, everybody wants to save children. Nobody wants to see children exploited. And they were able to work their way into this because so much of QAnon was already this sort of anti-pedophile moral panic hysteria. So those movements merged together really well. And you really started to see the kind of the harbingers of this now conspiracy theory of everything in late summer, early fall of 2020, when you started to have these marches going on.
Right.
And you saw some QAnon iconography. You know, you had people holding up signs with hashtag where we go, when we go all. But just as many people had never heard of QAnon. They'd come to save the children through pandemic stuff, through anti-5G stuff, anti-vaccine stuff, as their Facebook groups were showing them more and more stuff that they were willing to believe in. So it was a very unorganized, very nebulous movement. You know, a lot of these protests were just like people just sort of marching around and being angry and yelling. You know, you couldn't even tell sort of what they were angry about. They were just mad. They were mad that they've been on lockdown. They were mad about the pandemic. They were mad about their life or whatever had gone wrong, and they'd had to take it out on somebody. And so the evolution of that amorphous movement is now being seen at school board meetings, at city council meetings, running for local office, where you have this same sort of, you know, hexagon of conspiracy theories of stolen election, COVID is a hoax, Obama's a, you know, Kenyan, you know, we got to build the wall, the caravans are coming, you know, all of this stuff is getting merged together, and it doesn't need QAnon anymore. It doesn't need that branding. It doesn't need Q drops. You know, if you look at Q drops as a scripture for a new religion, people don't go to church demanding new books of the Bible. They've got the Bible. They've got everything they need, and they will analyze it endlessly and find whatever they need in it. So I think the same thing is really happening with Q. The organized, branded QAnon movement really is receding, but what's taking its place is a much more mainstream, much more vanilla, much more palatable to a certain type of person conspiracy theory of everything. And they maybe don't believe all of it, but they believe a lot of it, and they can be talked into the rest of it.
Yeah, you know, I'm I'm struck by of QAnon and kind of this like the social media hyper evolution of a conspiracy theory, and this is kind of a thought that I've had, which is, you know, now, you know, prior to this, you know, think about the Bircher movement or previous conspiracy theories, like you really had to go out of your way or have some sort of random encounter to even come across of a lot of these conspiratorial ideas, right? And so the ideas put out by, you know, the gate-kept media, you know, your local newspaper, and you had a local politics beat guy, and you had, you know, you had your local news, television news or local radio news. And there was a lot more professionals, a lot more gatekeepers. There was the fairness doctrine. There, you know, there was regulations on what could be on, you know, advertisements for politicians. They campaigns took in a lot less money, and kind of the information space was a lot more policed and gatekept. And you know, there were other institutions like churches and unions that have declined tremendously, that brought together communities and built social bonds. What do you think about the idea of just the use of social media to massively proliferate these ideas and serve as kind of like a natural selection experiment, where the ideas that most hook up into our human, you know, the problems in human cognition are the ones that get selected very quickly, and an idea about, you know, children being harvested by the rich hits some part of our reptilian brain, and that can super proliferate. Whereas in the past, those kind of ideas were never really even able to spread.
Right. I think that, you know, conspiracy theories have always been with us, and they've always been believed by a certain number of people. There's a lot of polling that shows that we aren't more conspiratorial as a society. What has changed is that they are easier to find, and they don't take any work anymore. To be a conspiracy theorist, I mean, even really getting into the late 90s, you had to know where the Usenet boards and the message boards were.
Right.
And you had to know which shortwave radio station had the new, you know, Bill Cooper rant about the New World Order. You had to know where the weird bookstore was. You had to go to the gun show to get the new Clinton body count tape.
Or the Turner Diaries.
None of that. Right. Yeah. You know, you couldn't get the Turner Diaries in one click. You had to go somewhere. You had to know who had it. It was like passed around like a secret. And of course, we love secrets, and we love gossip, and we love things that we're not supposed to know about. Now, anybody can do anything. I can go online in one click and get the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It takes no effort. I can go with one click, maybe now 2 clicks, and get Plandemic, or the 10-part video series Fall of the Cabal, that I know for a fact radicalized a ton of people into QAnon. Now, they were already open to it, but that was their gateway into this whole new mythology. it doesn't take any work to find any of this stuff anymore. And it doesn't take any real work to become a personality in that world. We've seen
Absolutely.
these gurus rise from complete obscurity to become celebrities in this world. I talk about this a lot in the book. You have somebody like this guy, Dave Hayes, aka Praying Medic, this divine healer, self-taught, dream interpreter who would make a YouTube video and he'd get 1,000 views for it. Then he starts talking about QAnon and making a constant stream of content, all of which you can get, either for free or very inexpensive. None of it's paywall, none of it's hard to get. And he becomes a superstar. And he's writing books, and he's got a nonprofit. A lot of these people were able to very easily monetize this stuff that they were just making up as they went along because they just did a lot of it. And it was easy to find. And that, of course, is where we get back to Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and the complicity of these companies who knew full well what was going on and how popular and how toxic this stuff was. And they just didn't do anything about it because they didn't want to be seen as censoring conservatives or not playing to both sides. And there are no both sides when you have a genocidal conspiracy theory. It has to be dealt with. And unfortunately, there are no gatekeepers, and the ones who are the gatekeepers weren't doing anything. So everything got to be everywhere, and it is incredibly easy to find. And you stumble on it if you don't know what it is, and it sounds good to you because, hey, you've been kind of thinking the same thing for a while. And then here somebody's put this into words, and now you can share it with all your buddies, and they can find the same thing. And it becomes like pee in a pool, and it's impossible to get out.
It's funny you mentioned this because when I as somebody who's doing an alternative media project myself, but from the left, yesterday we covered the fact that Twitter just admitted that they had a massive algorithmic advantage for conservative content. Sure. Where like similarly situated content with the same kind of like following and the same interaction, the conservative information would be served to more people than the same view from the left. And that it wasn't just that this stuff is happening naturally. It was baked into these algorithms that conservative content would be advantaged. And there was actually, and Facebook famously had meetings with people like Ben Shapiro, Dan Bongino, Donald Trump Jr.
Alex Jones too,
yeah, and they pushed these people knowingly, while pushing down groups like, say, Mother Jones or the Young Turks or similar things that were more left populist, which are inherently a lot more foundationally centered to reality than its correspondents in the right. And so that kind of factor is important to me. Do you think we need to do something with social media to kind of rein in this kind of like algorithmic advantage for conservatives? Should there be transparency? Do you have any idea at what we do to kind of tamp down on fascist organizing? And do you think it's a big problem that, people need to be doing things in the streets or in their communities directly to confront the people that are doing this in their own like towns and cities?
Well, yes to all of that. Going to the social media question, then we'll go to the local activism. The social media companies bear an enormous amount of responsibility for what's happened with QAnon, with pandemic conspiracies, with stolen election conspiracy theories. You see it every day. You see the top 10 links on any given day on Facebook. It's like number one is like cute cats, and then it's like Bongino Shapiro, Shapiro Bongino, Breitbart Shapiro, Gateway Pundit Bongino Shapiro. Like the effect that is having on people is you are getting a fire hose of conspiracy theories, of hate, of absolutely unhinged nonsense coming at you from everywhere, and it never stops, and no one is able to check it. The only people who can are the social media companies themselves. I don't think that the government can, or it really should in a lot of ways, be the arbiter of what these companies do. I think it's got to be the companies themselves. And unfortunately, people click on the Bongino links, the Shapiro links, the Breitbart links, the X22 report, Praying Medic, all that stuff. Those conspiracy theories get clicks, they get eyeballs, they get ad revenue.
Yeah.
Reality-based, nuanced stories don't do that because that's not the world people want to live in. These people want to live in a world where their enemies are being destroyed and where their deepest, darkest conspiracies that they've held themselves for years are actually true. They want to be validated. They don't want to be told they're crazy. They don't want anything getting into their news bubble. So until the social media companies really realize how their services are being abused and realize that this is not a First Amendment issue. This is an issue of having terms of service and enforcing them and having them be transparent and consistent and applying them to everybody. When Facebook decided that Alex Jones and Ben Shapiro and Dan Bongino had a different rule book than everybody else, we were all screwed because they could game it and we couldn't.
Yeah. So okay. So I have a couple more questions for us. The one I wanted to talk to you is about the phenomenon, because I grew up in this period, which was a website like 4chan, which, 4chan, 8chan, these kind of unregulated modern, image boards from, the more seedy parts of the internet. How do you see them continuing to influence Q, and what are your thoughts on like the rise of Q from these like image boards where it's not even sure if it was the first post was serious,
right?
Like what are your thoughts on the effects of QAnon on these movements, and should we keep our eyes on those places as fonts of future concern for fascist organizing?
Oh yeah, I mean the idea that we can ignore places like 4chan and some of the really swampier, Q adjacent sites, and some of these alternative platforms like Rumble and MeWe and all this other stuff, we can't ignore that. We should know by now that ignoring something does not make it go away. It just means it grows while no one's watching it. The sort of emergence of Q on 4chan is so interesting, because though there was already a tradition of these anons who would pretend to be a White House insider, an FBI insider. There was one that wasn't well known called Highway Patrolman that supposedly busted $1 billion of adrenochrome coming across the US-Mexico border. That was already like a well-established tradition, that kind of live-action role-playing, LARPing, as we call it. But Q was a little bit different in that it wasn't even called Q at that point. It didn't have a name, in that it had a very specific thing that was going to happen, which was Hillary Clinton's arrest. And a very specific way that you would know about it was that there would be troops in the streets putting down the opposition. And of course, that was tied into the Antifa uprising conspiracy theory that was going around at the exact same time, that on November 3rd or November 4th, 2017, Antifa super soldiers were going to rise from the earth and go door to door, grabbing Trump supporters and throwing them in death camps.
Right.
People really believed that this was going to happen. And whoever was making these posts understood that people believed that this was going to happen, and they tied it all together. And it was a much more compelling story than anything that anybody had ever done before in that world of anons. And we've seen on 4chan that a really compelling story can really take off. We've seen it with something like Slender Man, something like Rick rolling. I mean, that's not a story, but it's a compelling and easily shareable meme that has the potential to break through into the mainstream. It's not like this had never happened before. It had never happened with something like Q before, but 4chan has often served as a hotbed of burgeoning pop culture, because it's not all racists and neo-Nazis. There is some legitimate stuff there. There's also racists and neo-Nazis. And what happens with platforms like that is that people talk about free speech and that, everybody should just be able to say what they want and let the market decide. The problem is that when you do that, you immediately get co-opted by racists and neo-Nazis. It's impossible to not do that. You have to have some kind of moderation, so that when you have a space where there's no moderation, nobody's watching what's going on, and anybody can say what they want, it is an absolute petri dish for hoaxes and rumors and conspiracy theories. And a lot of that stuff's not going to go anywhere. You can't just sit on 4chan and wait for another QAnon to emerge. There's a million different things there, and you have no idea what's going to emerge. You can tell that it's starting to emerge when it starts to make its way up to more popular right-wing blogs, more popular right-wing conspiracy content creators. Then it works its way up to places like Breitbart and Gateway Pundit and Daily Caller. and then it works up to some of the bigger right-wing pundits on Twitter, then it gets to Fox News. And then, of course, then it would get to Trump, and Trump would tweet it out to everybody, and then you would have a mainstream conspiracy theory. It's very hard to know that that's happening until it's happening. So the idea of watching out for the next Q, I don't think we'll know what that is until it already emerges. And it will be a little bit more focused and a little bit more specific than this grand conspiracy theory of everything that's powering conservative politics right now. It will be more secret. It will have more jargon. It will be a little more selective about who believes in it. But there will be something, and we probably won't know it's coming until it's already much more formed than Q was in those very early days. So that's a very, very long-winded way of saying we really need to pay attention to these places. We can't write this stuff off. We can't just say, hey, deny it oxygen and it'll die off. We now know that that is not true, and that is not how this stuff works.
And I think the final question I had for you today, Mike, and then we can plug whatever you want to plug,
Sure.
obviously the book, but
Sure.
which is for those people watching who have family and friends who are, if not fully Q brained, or at least Q curious.
Yeah.
What can we do to like pull people out? Do you have, through all your conversations or research, do you have any tips or techniques that you've seen be effective at pulling people out of this kind of environment and from this rabbit hole? Or is it just something that people have to organically work out for themselves, and you have to wait as a supportive family member or friend?
Yeah, it's something I write about quite a bit in the book. There's a whole chapter about sort of what to do and what not to do with your Q-pilled cousin. The answer really is sort of all of that. There are ways to help people get out of movements like this. But ultimately, the people that I've talked to who have left QAnon, and it's not that many people. This is not, to go back to Scientology. Please don't sue us, Scientology.
Oh, crap.
To go back to that, you have a very vocal, very well-known group of apostates who have books and podcasts and are able to speak at length to their experiences and how they got out and what they can do to help other people getting out of that particular movement. You get the same thing with MLMs. There's a big burgeoning ex-MLM movement that's going on. You don't have that with Q. It's so new that the people who are getting out of it are really just figuring out for themselves what doesn't work in it and kind of running with that. But there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot of, how could I have possibly believed that? And you don't have a big group of people going, yeah, I believed it too. You're not crazy. Here's what happened to you, and here's how I can help. What you really can do for the sort of the Q curious person in your life is watch their social media. These are not, by and large, people who are going to be shy about what they have discovered. The zeal of the new convert is very apparent with QAnon. They will start talking about forensic audits. They will start talking about ivermectin. They will start talking about the deep state, how we have to, take over our local school boards to have a national impact. They will share it. And that's where you can say, hey, I noticed you shared that thing. Let's talk about that. I'm not sure how much of that is true. Very conversational, very friendly. You're not their enemy. They might start to think that you are, but you are not their enemy. Don't belittle them. Don't mock them. Don't shame them. It's hard not to sometimes, but that is not going to help you at all. And it will drive them further into whatever they're starting to believe in. Don't try to debate them. Don't try to debunk it. You can never do that with a conspiracy. It never, ever works. I don't do debates with conspiracy believers because there's no such thing as winning. Just be in their life. Be a friendly person who is there for them. You still love them. You still care about them. You are not going to debate the finer points of who actually won the election. But hey, did you see this new movie? Hey, did you catch the World Series? Maintain a line of contact with them so that if it does start to fall apart for them, if they find something in it that doesn't work for them anymore, they will turn to you because you're the one who's stuck with them. Now, if they start talking about violence, if they're talking about hurting themselves, quitting their job, hurting somebody else, then you really have to step in forcefully. There might be a point you have to get the authorities involved. You might have to cut them out of your life to keep yourself safe. And that is a completely legitimate thing to do. There is no requirement to have a Q believer in your life. If they're talking about, going to the school board and like killing somebody. You don't need or want that in your life. But the best thing to do for that person is stay in their life as a positive presence and as a positive influence. And it's really hard to do that because they're going to be talking about a lot of crap, and you want to reach through the screen and like wring their neck. Like, how could you be this crazy? But they're going through something. They're looking for something, and they're finding it in the wrong place.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on,
Yeah.
Mike. I really appreciate it. So mods, if you can go ahead and spam in the chat where everybody can find
Sure.
Mike's book. And let's see. So we have the book, which is what was the title again? It was The Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult, and Conspiracy Theory of Everything. And I encourage everyone to read the book, especially the part giving advice, because I know this is something I get asked a lot, which is help me save my mom or whatever.
What do I do? And that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this, was because people were asking me like, what do I do? How do I help? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a doctorate in research. Like, I have no idea. I'm just trying to watch this and respond to it humanely and trying to understand what the hell is going on here. So, I mean, maybe if I was able to do that, maybe some other people can do that too.
All right. Well, where can people find you? Just Twitter on Rothschild MD?
Yes, that anything that I do is going to be on there. I mean, I have a blog, but I haven't updated in a long time just because the book and other stuff. You can get the book basically anywhere. Certainly Amazon, you can get it. Local bookstores, bookshop.org. You can get it directly through the publisher. There's a hardcover, there's an ebook, there's an audiobook. However you consume books and wherever you get them from, there is an option for you.
All right, Mike. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. This was terrific.
And keep us apprised of any more work that you do. And if you want to come back on, I'd be happy to have you.
Yeah, this was terrific. Thank you so much.
All right. See you, Mike.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.